Hi everyone, today we're going to look at decimals. Now decimals are a way of representing part of a whole number. They're sort of an alternative to fractions, I suppose. We often convert decimals to fractions and fractions to decimals, but we'll talk about that in another lesson. Anyway, so here we have a multi-digit number that has lots of decimal places. Now every number that comes after our decimal point, which is this here, we call these decimal places. So this particular number has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 decimal places. All right, so here, the way we say this number is different to when we're only pronouncing a whole number. I'll show you what I mean. So this number, I would say, is 827.14563. Okay, I don't try and even though I've labeled this here as a millionth, I don't try and pronounce it as, point 145,000 or anything like that. Once you get to your decimal point, you just say the numbers. So 827.14563. Okay. Now, each of these numbers represents a part of a whole number. And the further away from the decimal point you go, the smaller the parts are. So these here on this left-hand side of the decimal point, they're whole numbers. I'm familiar with this. This is just 827, easy. So I know that this number here is my hundreds, this is my tens, this is my ones. But when I get down to my decimals, this number here represents a tenth. So it's one, it's like a whole number that's been broken up into 10 parts. So this number represents tenths. This one here is hundredths, thousandths, 10,000ths, 100,000ths, millions, and it would keep going until the end of time. Okay, so the further away from the decimal point you get, the smaller the numbers are. So I'm going to show you what this would look like if it was written in fraction form, because as I said before, we often convert between decimals to fractions. So this one here represents a tenth. This one here is a hundredth, and so on. Okay, so now I've written what each of these decimal places represents, each of the spots. So this here, it's 1/10, this is a hundredth, this is a thousandth, 10,000, 100,000, million. Okay, but because there are numbers, different numbers in each of these places, I'll actually show you what each of these numbers represents. So this one, it's 1 out of 10 because the number is a 10, whereas this one's a 4. So this is 4 out of 100. This is 5 out of 1,000. This is 6 out of 10,000. This is 9 out of 100,000. And this is 3 out of 1,000,000. So you can see the parts are getting really, really small the further away from the decimal point that we go. So the key things to know from this is that the further away from the decimal point that you get, the smaller the numbers get. We call these tenths, hundredths, thousandths. They end in ths, basically. Yeah. And this is what they would look like if they were written as fractions. Okay, now let's see if we can do some ordering decimals. All right, now what we want to do is we want to be able to order these numbers that have different decimals on the end. Okay, so we want to be able to figure out which is the first biggest, the second biggest, third biggest, fourth biggest, fifth biggest, or the smallest. Okay, cool. So what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that they are all lined up with the decimal places stacked on top of one another. That will make it easier for you to compare the different decimal places. Okay, so they've all got the same first number. So they all start with 6 in the ones column. Cool. So then I'm going to move over and compare my tenths. Okay, so I'm comparing this number, this number, this number, this number, and this number. Okay, and I want to figure out which of these is the biggest. Okay, so I've got a 4, a 3, a 9, a 3, and a 4. Okay, straight away I know that my 9 is the biggest number there, so that's going to be this is going to be my biggest number altogether because it has the biggest tenths. Okay, now I'm going to compare my hundredths. So I'm looking, this one doesn't have a number there. This one has a 9, this has a 3, a 1, and a 0. Okay, now, first up, this number up here doesn't have a number in the hundredths column. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a 0 there as a placeholder. Let me use a different colour. Because technically, every single number has infinite zeros after it. So I can continue putting zeros after it until I can figure out my purpose, figuring out which is bigger and which is smaller, okay? So all numbers have infinite zeros on the end. So now I want to be comparing my hundredths. So I'm comparing my second decimal place, which is this column here, which has the biggest number. So I've got a 0, a 9, a 3, a 1, and a 0. Again, I can tell that this one here is the biggest, so this is going to be my second biggest number. 2 here. And this has a 3, so that's going to be my third biggest number. Oh, no, sorry, that one's already done. Let me put a cross through there so I don't keep comparing that one. So that one's done. All right. And then this one is done as well. Cool. So now I'm just left to compare this one, and this one. Now this one has a 1 here, so that's going to be my third biggest number. So that one's gone. So now I'm just comparing this one and this one. All right, they both have zeros, so now I need to move over to the next decimal place. So I'm looking here. Now again, this one doesn't have a number, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a 0 there as a placeholder. So I'm comparing that one and that one. Oh, they're both zeros. I'm going to have to move over to the next decimal place. So now I'm looking at this column. Again, this one doesn't have one, so I have to put a 0 there as a placeholder, but this one has a 9. So which is bigger, a 0 or a 9? It'll be the 9, so that makes that number my fourth biggest number, and then this is the fifth, or the smallest. Cool. So that's how we order numbers that have decimal places. Stack your decimal places directly on top of each other and go number by number, further and further away from the decimal place until you get all the way to the end, and you're comparing in each column which is the biggest number. Okay, or if you're looking for the smallest, you're going to be finding the smallest number. So, moral of the story, stack them. Make it so much easier for you. Okay, cool. Thank you for watching.